Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into what is easily one of the most infamous, captivating, and deeply polarizing criminal cases in modern American history. We're talking about the 1989 Beverly Hills murders committed by the Menendez brothers. It's been more than 3 decades, and this case still completely grips the public imagination. Relying strictly on court records, investigative timelines, and some absolutely massive recent legal developments, we're going to break down exactly what happened. So let's dive right in.
Right off the bat, we have to ask the ultimate question. Were the Menendez brothers cold-blooded killers motivated by pure greed, or were they traumatized victims pushed way beyond their breaking point? This is the central, unjilting debate of this entire complex story. The actual facts of who committed the crime, they've never really been in serious dispute. The real battle here is entirely about the why. So I want you to keep that question in the back of your mind as we look at the evidence.
To understand how we even got to that question, we have to rewind to the night of August 20, 1989. Picture this. 21-year-old Lyle and 18-year-old Erik call 911 in an absolute panic. They report that they've just come home to find their parents, José and Kitty Menendez, dead in their family room. The violence was so devastating, so brutal, the detectives initially assumed it was a mob hit, or maybe the work of professional assassins targeting José's business enemies. Literally, in those early days, no one suspected the grieving sons. And a big part of why no one suspected them was the family's picture-perfect image. From the outside looking in, the Menendez family was the ultimate American dream. José had immigrated from Cuba and worked his way up to become a hugely wealthy entertainment executive, while Kitty dedicated her life to raising the boys in a sprawling, multi-million-dollar Beverly Hills mansion. But as investigators were about to find out, the reality behind closed doors was incredibly different from that flawless facade they projected to the world. So what tipped off the police? Well, it was the money. Millions of dollars. Almost immediately following the brutal murders of their parents, a massive amount of cash started moving. The brothers went on an unprecedented spending spree, just burning through millions. They're buying luxury cars, expensive watches, designer clothing, and spending lavishly on entertainment. Naturally, this incredibly rapid consumption of wealth raised massive red flags for investigators. Think about it. If these were just devastated, grieving sons, why on earth were they behaving like they had just won the lottery? Suspicion firmly shifted their way. But even with the spending, how did the police actually catch them? Interestingly, it wasn't some CSI-style forensic evidence left at the scene. It was a psychological unraveling. Erik Menendez started seeing a psychologist named Dr. Jerome Oziel. During these therapy sessions, the burden of the secret apparently became too much, and Erik confessed on tape. Once that audio evidence eventually made its way into the hands of law enforcement, the trap was set. In March 1990, the whole nation was absolutely stunned when the two privileged brothers were arrested. Which brings us to the first major phase of our story, the competing motives: greed or self-defense. Those arrests set the stage for one of the most closely watched trials in American history, turning the courtroom into a battleground for two very different theories. The jury was essentially handed two completely opposing realities. On one side, you have the prosecution's theory, which boils down to pure greed. They argued that this was a cold, premeditated execution designed to unlock a massive inheritance, pointing directly to that wild spending spree as proof. But on the flip side, the defense argued the brothers were reacting to years of severe sexual, physical, and emotional abuse. It was two entirely different lenses through which to view the exact same crime. Let's break down that defense a bit more. They alleged that José Menendez had subjected his sons to severe, long-term sexual, physical, and emotional abuse, and that Kitty Menendez had failed to protect them. The defense claimed the brothers' actions were actually a desperate act of survival because they genuinely believed their parents were going to kill them to keep those horrific family secrets buried. Now, while the legal truth of those specific claims remains the central debate of the trial, and we're just laying out what was argued here, for the defense, this intense environment of fear was the sole catalyst for the tragedy. Okay, moving into the legal battles, two completely different trials. You might be wondering how the justice system actually handled these completely competing theories. Well, it was a total roller coaster. It's fascinating how the mechanics of a trial can completely dictate its outcome. Take Trial 1, which ran from 1993 to 1994. It was fully televised and turned into a massive, absolute media circus. And usually, they used two separate juries, and the defense was allowed to present extensive testimony regarding the abuse allegations. The result? Mistrials. Neither jury could reach a unanimous verdict. But the second trial in 1995? That was a totally different story. The judge heavily restricted significant portions of that abuse-related evidence, forcing the focus onto the murders themselves. And as you'll see, that difference in what the jury was allowed to hear led to a radically different result. At the conclusion of that more restricted second trial in 1996, both Lyle and Erik Menendez were convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Without the full scope of the abuse evidence, the prosecution's argument of a planned, financially motivated execution won the day. The brothers were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And for decades, it seemed like the heavy iron doors of the justice system had slammed shut on this case for good. But history has a funny way of revisiting things, bringing us to the modern re-examination decades later, because recently, this case has come roaring back into the public consciousness. So after their 1996 life sentences, the brothers sat in prison for over 30 years. But then, between 2023 and 2024, documentaries, social media, and just a generally much more nuanced societal understanding of trauma completely reignited public interest. We view allegations of abuse, especially involving male victims, very differently today than juries did back in the early 90s. This massive cultural shift, combined with completely new evidence, led to a staggering legal update in 2025. Their sentences were reduced to 50 years to life, which officially makes them eligible for parole consideration. You're probably asking, what was this new evidence that actually shifted the legal landscape? Well, first, a newly discovered letter allegedly written by Erik before the murders explicitly describes ongoing abuse by his father. Second, a former Menudo band member named Roy Rossello publicly accused José Menendez of sexually abusing him in the 1980s. While these are allegations, society's zero-tolerance stance on the abuse of minors gave these corroborating claims immense cultural weight. And finally, over their 30-plus years inside, both brothers demonstrated really extensive rehabilitation, earning degrees and mentoring other inmates. All of this combined is what prompted that resentencing. Which brings us right back to where we started. More than 30 years later, this case perfectly captures the complex intersection of crime, family trauma, and the evolution of public perception. The legal system has offered them a second chance, but public opinion remains fiercely divided. When you weigh the brutal crime and that massive spending spree against the restrictive second trial, the new evidence of abuse and their decades of rehabilitation, were they calculating killers or victims pushed completely over the edge? It's a profound question about justice, and honestly, it's one you'll have to answer for yourself. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the details.